exciting video today talking about one of the most underrated fruits in the wild food world, at least in my opinion, that is nannyberries. So these are a viburnum. They're related to highbush cranberries, and they kind of look like aronia berries a little bit, but they're a little pointed at the tip, and they taste a little bit like prunes that have a seed in them. And if that doesn't sound crazy good, just stay with me for a little bit. We're going to cover a lot of stuff in this video. So harvesting, nanny puree, nanny butter, nanny bread, and a few other uses. Lots of stuff that you can do with this really versatile fruit. That's also a great thing to plant in your yard or in the backyard. It's also common in landscaping. When we're harvesting, I like to use an herb rake or a blueberry rake. And you can see the leaves are also still green on the plant, but I'm making sure that I'm finding clusters of berries that are totally ripe. If you wait until the fruit is still on the tree in the winter, because this will stay on the tree, on the shrub until the winter, the stems will be a little bit dried out. This is my preferred time. It's totally fine to get them when some of the leaves may have changed too, as long as the stems are still red and not brittle. And another thing to mention is that little shrub trees are meant to bend, so it's totally fine to bend the whole tree down as I'm doing here. You can see it's still very hot out, but bending the tree down will allow you to access all the fruit at the top and on those higher branches. So don't worry about that. Now the fruit will stay on through the fall into the winter. This is just this week, but it'll be a little more tricky to clean, and I'll go over that in a second. When you get back, if you harvested with a rake, you're going to have a lot of leaves and a few stems in there, maybe a few unripe berries. So you can winnow these by pouring the fruit from one bowl into another bowl in front of a box fan, or you can just do it by hand. This was a kind of a small batch that I harvested. Totally fine to just do it by hand. It only takes a few minutes, and it's a lot easier than if you pick the fruit later. If you pick the fruit later, when the stems are dried, this is what it's going to look like. You're going to have a lot more stems that need to be removed. My advice is to get them in mid-October or early November. It could fluctuate a little bit with the season because you're going to basically puree these, and you don't want to be picking through all those little stems. It's totally fine, and I'll do it sometimes if I have to, but ideally it's better if the fruit comes right off the stem. So what you make with nannyberries is nannyberry puree. This is kind of like the mother recipe for processing. We're going to take the fruit that we've cleaned, and then we're going to add some water, just like water to cover or a little bit more. It's not an exact science. And then what we're going to do is just cook the nannyberries and the water, and then we have to mash them up. So you can do that manually with like a sauerkraut masher or something, but it's a little bit imprecise, and with the amount of water I add, that makes it a little bit tricky. What I prefer to do is to use a hand blender, but we're going to make sure that we're not pureeing these things to smithereens or putting them in a really strong blender, because all of this fruit has a big flat seed in it, and it's kind of soft like a watermelon seed, so you don't want to break that up. The good thing is, unlike highbush cranberries, which these are related to, you can cook the fruit and it's not going to get bitter, but you do want to remove all of the seeds because they're not good to eat. So that is what it's going to look like when it's all kind of cooked. You see it got really thick and glossy and shiny and beautiful. Now all we have to do is remove the seeds. So a food mill works perfectly fine, but it's kind of a pain, and I feel like it's a little more inefficient than using a conical sieve. So I'm going to get another one of those conical sieves that has a pestle, just because I think it's going to be a little more faster and efficient than a food mill. Because with the food mill, you can see there's a lot of goodness still left in the skins and seeds that are left in the bowl there. So I'm actually going to put those back into another pot, and I'll add a little bit of water, and what we'll get there is what I call the second wash. So this is just a way to try to help you extract as much of the puree as possible. Just mix that together, and then we're just going to put that right back into the food mill. This will give you a slightly more watery puree, but it's also what I've found is a great way to extract as much of the puree as possible, especially useful if you are picking small batches, which if you're new to nannyberries, you might be picking small batches at first until you get the hang of it. So you can see that's pretty loose. So all we have to do is remove a little bit of that water. And how we're going to do that is just by baking it. You can bake it in the pan that I have pictured, or if you have a larger batch, use a wider pan. The wider the pan, the faster the water is going to evaporate. And after it's done, it should look like this. It should have the consistency, basically, of really thick applesauce or mashed up bananas, pretty much. That's kind of what you want. And you could freeze that from there and just keep it in the freezer for when you want it. If you want to can it, you can make Nannyberry maple butter, which is the first thing that I ever made with it, and it is wonderful. So to do that, and there's a recipe on my site for this, you take your Nannyberry puree. This is one that was from Sam Thayer. You can see how thick that is, way thicker than mine. Add a little cinnamon, a little pinch of salt, and that's it. Now we're going to bake that in a moderately hot oven. This is the same thing I do with the crab apple butter I posted a month or so ago. Just give it a whisk here and there, and you're going to see as it cooks and the water gets out, it's going to be really thick. And just like crab apple butter or other fruit butters, we just want to keep cooking this until it's super thick, thick enough so that a spoon will stand up in it, and we can see the bottom of the pan when a spoon is scraped through. That's one of the really kind of easy benchmarks to look at when you're cooking with fruit butters, is that if you put a spoon or a spatula through it, you can see the bottom. Okay, now I'm just going to put that into a jar. You could process that in a water bath, it'd be totally fine, or it will keep in the fridge for a solid month or in the freezer. Now, one of the first things you should make is Nannyberry bread, so a great way to use the puree is to use it in baking. And quick breads and cakes are probably the best place to start here, but especially banana bread. You can just plug this into banana bread as you would bananas, as long as it has the same consistency. And I've done a couple different recipes here. This one I used 1 cup. You can do a regular batch of banana bread with 2 cups of puree if you have a lot. After everything's mixed up, mix in the flour, bake it. Adding black walnuts to it is fantastic, and I actually made this and brought it up to Chef Elena Reagan's restaurant, the Milkweed Inn, this year, and served it as our lunch course. It's really, really good. Another thing you can make is Nannyberry mousse. That's adding a little bit of whipped cream set with gelatin. You can use it in fruit cakes. This one is fantastic. Kind of an old school pudding made with Nannyberry puree, a bunch of fruit. This one I invented for Sam Thayer's book party. It's a black locust Nannyberry tart with angelica and butternuts. Or I've also made a marquee out of the puree. Recipes are on my website. Thanks for watching. I hope you learned a little bit about Nannyberries.